Good evening, everyone, and welcome to East Bay Mud's Water Wednesday series. I'm Mary Campbell, the Community Affairs Representative for the McCollum Watershed at East Bay Mud, and I'll be your host tonight. Water Wednesday is our ongoing series where we dive into important topics related to our water and wastewater systems. Tonight, we're talking about the golden mussel, an invasive aquatic species recently discovered in our San Joaquin Delta. This tiny mussel poses a serious threat to our water supply, infrastructure, and natural environment. And we're here to talk about what that means for East Bay Mud and our community. We have a great lineup of experts that are joining us tonight. We have Catherine Mandella, environmental scientist and aquatic invasive species specialist from California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Paul Gilbert-Snyder, Associate Civil Engineer in East Bay Mud's Operations and Maintenance Support Department. Michelle Workman, Manager of Fisheries and Wildlife in our Natural Resources Department. And Chuck Beckman, Manager of Watershed and Recreation in the Natural Resources Department. This event is being recorded and will be available within about a week at ebmud.com/waterwednesday, and we'll share that link again at the end. So if you need to revisit any part of our discussion tonight, you'll be able to find it there. By attending, you consent to being part of the recording. We also want to hear from you during this time. And so if you have questions, go ahead and drop them in the Q&A function. Catherine Horn, our Senior Community Affairs Representative, will be responding throughout the event, and then we'll save some time at the end for live Q&A as well. If we don't get to your question tonight or you think of something later, feel free to email us at waterwednesday@ebmud.com, and we'll share that email again before we wrap up tonight. Now let's dive in. As many of you know, East Bay Mud has taken proactive steps to protect our reservoirs because while the golden mussel has not been found or has been found in the San Joaquin Delta, it has not made its way into our water supply, and we're working hard to keep it that way. That's why we've temporarily closed all boat launches at our reservoirs to prevent an infestation. However, recreation areas do remain open, and you can still rent boats through our concessionaires. We understand that these closures impact many of you, and we're actively working on plans for how and when we can safely reopen. Tonight, we'll break down what that process looks like and why it's not as quick as we'd all like it to be. There's a lot of factors at play: environmental protections, infrastructure needs, and long-term solutions, and we want to be thorough in our approach. So to start us off, I'll turn it over to Catherine Mandella from California Fish and Wildlife. She's going to give us an overview of the golden mussel from the statewide perspective. So Catherine, take it away.
Hello, everyone. So thank you for being here tonight. And one of the things that I'd like to start off with, as a collaborator with the East Bay Mud, California Department of Fish and Wildlife is the lead agency on dealing with the golden mussel, as well as the quagga and zebra mussel. Now, where we lead is in coordination with agencies and setting up regulations, which we currently have an emergency regulation put in place, and it'll eventually become pretty much absorbed with the quagga and zebra mussel program. And but it is important to know that anything state water related is led by DWR, which is Department of Water Resources. But having said that, though we collaborate and have regulations put in place, all the different water agencies are ultimately their own jurisdiction and dictate how they will operate their waters. And there's various reasons to that, which we're going to get to. You'll understand why different reservoirs are open and others are closed, and the different programs are in different places and others don't. So we can go ahead and get right into it. Let's get into the actual golden mussels and the other stuff we're looking at. So if you look at this page right here, if you look at the upper right picture, that's the golden mussel. Now, one of the things that that picture is missing is little hairy things that are called byssal threads, that if you look at the quagga mussel picture on the far right, you'll see those little things attached to rocks with, or that to the rock in that picture. All three of those mussels, the golden mussel, zebra mussel, and quagga mussel, They all have byssal threads. If you ever see any mussel in fresh water, that is going to be an indicator that it's an invasive, because none of our native mussels have byssal threads. So the top three are what we're going to focus on, and primarily the golden mussel. But I did put some photos of our native ones so that they don't get confused, because a lot of times we're out in the field and people say, oh yeah, no, I've been seeing mussels, they've been here for years. And oftentimes what they're referring to is the Asian clam, which you see in the bottom right. So Asian clam, yes, they're an invasive. Do they cause problems? Yes. But the level of problems they cause aren't nearly as injurious and complicated as the quagga and zebra mussel, and now even worse, the golden mussel, which we'll get into. But what if you do find these other native ones that you see, the California winged floater, and then the Western purse shell, you won't really see the Western purse shell too much in like the Bay Delta region, which is the region that I work in, by the way. You'll see them more like in the Sierra foothills and Northern California. But the California winged floater, you do see them a lot. And these are a species we definitely want to protect. Let's get into the next slide, and I'll share some more information that'll describe why. So let's start on the left side there, where you see the life cycle. So basically the biology of mussels, and both golden mussel and the quagga and zebra mussel, they have a very similar life cycle, only the golden mussel is a little, let's just say, more robust. They do things faster, longer, handle higher parameters. But basically, they start off in a little microscopic stage that we call veligers. It's their larval stage. We don't see them really with the naked eye at that point, which is the reason why I'm sure many of you have experienced going through a boat inspection, why it's so critical to not even have a little bit of water in your boat, because that little bit of water could have the larval stages of all these mussels that we're talking about. The photo that you see underneath the life cycle, that is a picture of what they look like in their veliger stage, their larval stage. And so when we're doing samples, that's one of the things that we're looking for in lab. There's more to that story, but the whole question is, how did they end up here? So we first saw them they showed up in one of DWR's stations that they monitor monthly. In just October of 2024, just a few months ago, they saw golden mussels on their station for the first time. And even the month prior to that, they hadn't seen any yet. Now, how they ended up, and this is at the port of Stockton, where they had the station and first discovered them. And the problem with, and why ports end up being a common place to see invaders for the first time, is because ships are coming from all over the world. And that picture you see in the bottom corner, that bottom left, that is a ship emptying its ballast water. So ships, when they're at sea, they'll take on water to make them heavier so that they can be more stable in open seas. But when they're going into shallower ports, and some of these ports are freshwater, like the port of Stockton, they'll have to release this water. Now, there are measures in place that try to mitigate this. Our state lands commission deals with this, and there are inspectors that go on boats. The bar pilots will have protocols that they go through when they help guide the ships in. The captains actually switch, and a bar pilot will go on that ship, bringing them in. There are measures in place, like sometimes chemical treatment, sometimes UV light treatment. But the bottom line is that it's not 100% foolproof. So even though these measures have been in place, and in a lot of countries, this has been a measure internationally, sometimes there's certain organisms that are way hardier than others. And obviously this golden mussel is a good example of that. They can handle way more polluted water than even quagga and zebra mussels. So that whole all that technical stuff that you're seeing in these columns here to the right, you don't need to boggle your mind with that too much. But the point is that this is an example of how much more hardy golden mussels are than even quagga and zebra mussels. So golden mussels can handle less calcium, more salinity. They have a wider temperature range of what they can survive in. They even spawn a little sooner. So in that life cycle stage, when they're about 3 weeks old, the golden mussels, they start to develop a shell. They need calcium in the water to be able to develop that shell. And they start looking for places to attach to. Their life cycle can continue on, anywhere from like 6 months of age to like a year, they can start reproducing. So in documents that I've read, they can even start reproducing even faster than quagga and zebra mussels. And they can live anywhere from 2 up to even possibly 10 years. Whereas quagga mussels and zebra mussels are similar, but they don't quite live as long from any of the literature and studies that we've ever come across. So this is one of the reasons why some reservoirs throughout California, particularly in the Sierras, where there's just lower calcium in the geology of that area. So a lot of reservoirs didn't have very high calcium levels and didn't see the need to put in, boat inspections for quagga and zebra mussel programs. So that's the case for some agencies, but this is not the case for all. But I just wanted to put that out there because I know that's a big question people have. Why does Berryessa have an inspection program and some other lake doesn't? These are some of the reasons why. So we can go ahead and go to one of the things I did want to mention is that the golden mussels originally come from China. However, you'll hear that they have spread and they have infested other parts of the world like South America, Europe, and some other locations. Whereas the quagga and zebra mussels, they'd come originally from the Caspian Sea area, and we ended up seeing them as early as the mid-'80s in the Great Lakes area, and they eventually spread into Lake Mead, and which eventually you'll see in a map. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. I will show that map in a few more slides, but what I wanted to cover is the main impacts. There's the 3 main issues that we deal with these injurious species, especially like a golden mussel. So ecologically, let's look at the photos on the left. What that is, that clump of stuff is mussels. What the person is holding, that guy's the bigger mussel underneath is an example of a native species of a local native mussel, like the California winged floater. I think this is an East Coast photo, but it's very similar. And now the East Coast, because the quagga mussels have invaded that area longer, the anodonta species, which are these winged floaters, are endangered. And this is something that we might end up seeing happening in the Delta, because these quagga and zebra mussels and golden mussels, they will cover them up and prevent them from opening up and feeding and reproducing. And so it's a way of out-competing them. And they do other damage, like you see that poor crayfish is covered with mussels. I've even seen photos of little dragonfly nymphs in the water that they have attached to. Now that's one aspect. They're a filter feeder. All these mussels that I'm talking about, they're filter feeders, and they're voracious filter feeders, meaning they'll filter feed they're basically causing a food chain collapse. So what's happening is what they'll do is filter feed all the little stuff away. So all the other smaller organisms like young fish, other organisms that need small things to eat, there's nothing left for them to eat. So it causes, like I said, a food chain collapse. If you were to go to Lake Havasu today and talk to anglers, most of them will tell you, you can't catch small things. They're all large, because none of the small fish that had been born were able to eat anything, and they died off. And so there's nothing, adults are going to eventually die or be caught. So that's one aspect. Another aspect to consider is the fact that when they filter feed the water away, they clear up the water column. So it'll look clear. And some people think, oh, that's a great thing. But actually, it's not so much. What it's doing is taking all the nutrients out. And what that does is it allows plants to be able to photosynthesize deeper. So they'll grow deeper. And then there's this plant boom. And we already have this problem already with hyacinth and primrose and other things in the Delta. What ends up happening when there's too much plant life, they absorb all the oxygen out of the water, and eventually everything can die. There are dead zones in parts of the Great Lakes where quagga and zebra mussels have been around for a while. I do want to say this is not all doom and gloom. There is a glimmer of hope here that I will get into the end, but I want to talk about all these impacts. So economically, what does this mean? Since they reproduce so fast, they'll clog up intakes to water treatment plants that come to our communities. They clog up irrigation. They'll clog up your boat system. So all these photos are examples of that. And then we're going to touch more on this later in the presentation. But if you go to the cultural side of it, like recreationally, there's a lot of problems. So as I mentioned, when they can cause, die-offs, and, they absorb all the oxygen. And what ends up happening, we're already kind of seeing this exacerbated by climate change and things warming up, is there's harmful algal blooms. And these algal blooms are very toxic. Please share with folks that it's a neurotoxin. And when you see water that looks like that, this is actually a photo of one of the Great Lakes. I think it's Lake Superior. Where that woman is standing there, that is not a good idea. You don't want to be near this stuff. It's there's definitely medical problems that are caused from these toxic blooms. And this is, again, going to be even more exacerbated by golden mussel. And then there's also closures. I know there's discrepancy as to why some lakes down south with quagga mussels are still open and others get closed. That's other reasons that we can't really get into. We don't have time to get into that now. But that San Justo Reservoir, which is near Hollister, and I'll show you in a map next, coming up, has been closed since they found zebra mussels in it in 2008. Let's go to the next slide. This map here is showing where we're finding these mussels. So if you look at the far left map with all the red dots, these are all locations. You see that's Antioch there, the Delta. And then those two dots down south of there, that's O'Neill Forebay, which flows into San Luis Reservoir. All those dots are where golden mussels have been detected. And it's possible they've gone maybe further within the Delta. They have not been found, even though the State Water Project has been exposed to this water, there hasn't been any settlement found to date. But these locations, we've definitely found actual specimens. And if you look at the map on the right, this is just to give you an example of where all the quagga and zebra mussel infested waters are. So if you look where I circled the big red circle, all the quagga mussel infestations are in Southern California. Most of that water was water received from the Colorado River. There's a few nearby that don't get Colorado River water, but they're very close to all these infestations. And even though those lakes like Lake Piru, Castaic, some of them, they had programs in place, some of them still managed to get infested. So that is something of concern. But because of the programs that we put in place since 2007, we've literally stopped the spread to the north. If you look at the circle in the middle, the small circle just below the golden one, that is where San Justo Reservoir is. It's near Hollister. That is the only zebra mussel infested reservoir in California, and that's the one that has been closed since 2008. And then basically that gold circle, I just put that there to show you the geographic area of where golden mussels are being found. Now, if we all work together, it's very possible that we can keep that circle that size and it won't go beyond there. So let's go to the next slide. This is, I just wanted to share this part with you because the blue dots, this is, basically the Bay Delta region up into the foothills there. The blue dots are where all the agencies, and actually these blue dots go all over the state. Even just since we've discovered them and started working together really hard in December, we've got actually a lot put in place since then, and it's only been 3 months. Those blue dots are indicating where all the agencies have been monitoring their waters and not finding them and reporting it. There's a reporting location that even citizens, there's citizen science, like even you folks can all help look and report, which we'll show you where and how to do later. But we can move to the next slide. I just wanted you all to see all the work that's getting done. Now, I wanted to drive home this message, the whole clean, drain, and dry message. I keep trying to share everybody, or when I see people and share and train people on this whole thing, I always like, add it to the stop, drop, and roll message that we've all had ingrained in our heads. Add the clean, drain, and dry one to it too. It doesn't matter where you go, what you do, always clean and drain and dry everything you have when you travel around, whether it's from, Lake McClure to Tahoe, or, you're home to Hawaii, or you're going to Thailand, whatever. Make sure you clean your shoes off, clean whatever, your snorkeling gear. Clean if you're going from traveling around with your dog. I've actually picked New Zealand mud snails off my dog before going to another location. So these things can be microscopic. If it's not quagga and zebra mussel or golden mussel, it's other things. There's things like whirling disease, there's chytrid fungus, there's New Zealand mud snails, which are really tiny. If it's not one thing, it's something else. So just assume that there could be something you could be transporting. So just clean, drain, and dry it, and it will help. And since these messages have been spread, we've noticed a slowing in the spread of invasive species. So, and you know what, I'm just going to put this out there too. What do you clean it with? Honestly, even if all you have is a sink, then that's better than nothing. We always recommend hot water. If you can avoid chemicals, avoid chemicals. There's many ways. In fact, there isn't a lot that hot water can't kill. Obviously, with sensitive gear, like in our case, we have water meters. But say you're a scuba diver, things that are sensitive that you don't want to melt. Basically, think of anything that your hand, as hot as your hand can handle it. Most gear can handle that. So nothing over 100 degrees, but a lot of these organisms, especially in their microscopic stage, will die after, water gets higher than 85 degrees. So that's something to keep in mind. I mean, even your dog can handle a nice bath at, 85, 90 degrees, maybe 85 degrees. Let's move to the next slide. So because, and I'd mentioned this earlier, because so many outreach measures, prevention programs have been in place, and even containment programs in areas that are already infested with something, it has really stopped the spread. It's really slowed down the spread, and maybe even stopped in some cases in some locations. And there's, it's whether it's a boat inspector, inspecting your own gear when you're traveling around. We also have detection dogs. Just to give an example, there's been cases I personally was involved with or heard, like for example, detection dogs have stopped boats with living quagga mussels on them from launching in Lake Mendocino, Lake Sonoma, Lake Tahoe. There was inspectors that found them there, and several other lakes throughout California. So these programs do work. Let's go into the next page. So I wanted to wrap it up. I'm going to hand you over to Paul, and I just wanted to share, spread the message, not the muscle. And it's really it takes a village, and when we all can share this information, then everybody can be on the same page and not confused about what to do, and be able to help out. So I'm going to let Paul take over from here, and then if there's any questions on my part, we'll have time for that later. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Catherine. Yes, my name is Paul Gilbert-Snyder. I work in the Operations and Maintenance Support Department here at EBMUD, and I oversee our aquatic invasives prevention program. And I'm going to talk a little bit about impacts to EBMUD's infrastructure and the risks that we're facing with this potential golden mussel in our system. So the next slide. As Catherine explained, the golden mussels, they form very dense colonies that can clog pipes. They can clog channels and aqueducts, and they can block water screens, cause lots of infrastructure damage. And the photo on the right there is from Brazil. It's a cooling pipe at a hydroelectric plant that obviously has a lot of golden mussels growing within it. And it very clearly would be a big issue if East Bay Mud had to start dealing with this kind of a situation. We have a very extensive water infrastructure system that I'll get to in a minute. But in addition to the infrastructure problems, golden mussels also cause water quality impacts. When the thick colonies die off, they can cause serious taste and odor issues in the drinking water system. And in addition to that, they promote the growth of pathogenic bacteria. So they're problematic in a number of water quality ways as well. And then there's another item that's the correlation between these growths of these dense growths of the golden mussel and an increase in toxic algae blooms. Basically, they create an imbalance in the ecosystem and the environment at a microscopic level, and it allows the toxic algae to grow advantageously and create algae bloom issues. So there are a number of reasons we don't want these in our reservoirs. And the next slide. So East Bay Mud, as I mentioned, has a lot of infrastructure. We've got 7 reservoirs, 2 of those upcountry, the Comanche Reservoir and Pardee Reservoir. And then we have 5 additional reservoirs in our service area. And we have 6 water treatment plants that draw water from those reservoirs. And then it's all interconnected with hundreds of miles of pumps, pipes, the aqueducts, lots of valves, water screens. Oh, in addition, I should also mention, I didn't mention, we've got a couple of power plants associated with our reservoirs upcountry. So there's a lot at risk here from the perspective of what happens if golden mussels were to enter our system. And it's not just keeping them out of, for example, Pardee. If we were to get an infestation in Pardee, that opens up our entire system to that infestation. So we're very, very conscientious. We're very risk averse. We do not want these golden mussels in our system anywhere. It could be very bad for us. So that's why we're being very conservative and working as hard as we can to protect ourselves from the golden mussel. And the next slide. So our East Bay Mud Reservoir is vulnerable. That's a base question, that people ask. Well, we weren't, quagga and zebra didn't seem to be that serious, and we never had a problem with them. As Catherine mentioned, golden mussels are very different from the quagga and zebra. We did a study back in 2009, which is shortly after quagga and zebra became an issue for California. And at that time, we looked at a number of invasive mussels, including quagga, zebra, and the golden mussel. And at that time, we identified the golden mussel as the only invasive mussel that all of our reservoirs were vulnerable to. So lucky for us, that was the one that showed up in Central California. Why are we vulnerable? They survive water temperatures from about 32 degrees Fahrenheit to about 90 degrees Fahrenheit. All of our reservoirs fall within that temperature threshold year round. Spawning occurs at temperatures above about 60 degrees Fahrenheit. All of our reservoirs would support spawning from about April through November. And then the minimum calcium requirements, which was one of the things that used to make our reservoirs not so vulnerable, especially Pardee and Comanche. They weren't so vulnerable to quagga and zebra from this perspective. But here, they only require approximately 1 to 3 milligrams per liter of calcium. And all of our reservoirs meet that threshold. They all have a mean calcium concentration greater than 3 milligrams per liter. So yes, all of our reservoirs are vulnerable. We have a lot riding on this. And that's why it's so important for us to protect our system. Now I will turn it over to Michelle Workman, and she'll talk about ecological risks.
Great, thank you, Paul. And you're going to hear a little bit of the same information that you heard from Catherine from me, but I'm really trying to put the ecological risk into the perspective for East Bay Mud reservoirs and our local environment, while Catherine was talking, a little bit more globally. And so she talked about the life cycle and talked about how these veligers are microscopic. And so for us, the complication is, so this is a very undetectable part of the life cycle. So we know that these veligers can exist in the water column floating like like plankton floats in the water column. And even as they start to become settlers and they're starting to settle in the sediment, they're very, very small, very hard to detect. We don't really start to see mussels as they've looked in the pictures you've seen for about a year when they become sexually mature. And so that really puts us behind in monitoring for these to try to figure out if we already have them, what to do about them, how to control them. So that's one of the complications. The other complication, and we've talked a little bit about the life cycle. So we know from literature and from its history that in Asia, where it's from, it can live up to 10 years. We also have information from South America where it is highly invasive that it only lives about 2 to 3 years. And so all of these, we don't know if it becomes established in the Central Valley, how long it will live, what its life cycle will look like, but there's likely changes that could come about in the future. Next slide. And so we've already started initial sampling efforts. We want to get ahead of this. We want to know what's in our reservoirs, what isn't. And so for veligers, we have been doing veliger tows to sample for quagga and zebra mussels historically. We've upped our protocols for more plankton tows in our reservoirs to now look for the veligers from golden mussels. We've also implemented an environmental DNA sampling protocol. So environmental DNA is based on the thought that animals shed some of their DNA into the environment constantly. So mussel is, it's going to be the settlers settle on the substrate, and they can be constantly shedding DNA into the environment. And we can actually just test the water, and the water could have signals of golden mussel in it. And so immediately when we heard about the golden mussel within the Central Valley, we contacted a consultant and started some eDNA sampling at all of our boat launches. And this was prior to any other action to see, was there anything there? And this was in December. We have not detected any eDNA of golden mussels so far, but we're going to go ahead and keep doing these types of sampling to try to stay ahead of it as much as we can. Next slide. And so when we talk about the ecological risks to the reservoirs, Catherine talked about how they are very efficient filter feeders. And so I just have a very simplified food pyramid here from a lake situation. And so we think about how this filter feeding is going to affect from the biological resource perspective. If we have a consumer that's basically eating all of those primary consumers, all of the zooplankton and phytoplankton that's in the water column, then the top parts of this pyramid are going to collapse. So we're not going to be able to sustain the fish populations that we want for sport fish recreation or for just maintaining public trust of native species. And so that's one of our big concerns. And these species can filter, a single adult can filter about 1/2 liter of water per hour. And as you saw in all those pictures, they don't exist as single adults. They exist in very tightly clumped masses of many, many individuals. So that's very concerning. Next slide. Something unique to East Bay mud, when we talk about impact to native species, and Paul mentioned all of our 7 reservoirs. Well, one of our reservoirs in the East Bay, Upper San Leandro Reservoir, has a very unique biological resource. We have a population of landlocked trout that had been anadromous steelhead, and they've been landlocked so long within Upper San Leandro Reservoir that they actually have maintained some very historic genetics from coastal steelhead populations. And the resource agencies have recognized the uniqueness of this population. It's self-sustaining. It breeds in tributaries to Upper San Leandro Reservoir, but they've actually used some of the progeny of this population to restore some coastal steelhead populations locally in the East Bay. And so that's something we really want to preserve. And one of the big conflicts between golden mussel and this species in particular is that this species is a zooplankton feeder. So this species wants to eat the same things that the golden mussel wants to eat. So if the golden mussel, being a very highly efficient filter feeder, cleans that water column out, that leaves this fish with very little food base in which to survive. And so we really want to protect that. And the way we do that is by protecting our entire system. Next slide. The other side of the ecological risk, we're not just talking about native fish here. We're talking about, and I'm assuming there's many people on this call that are active sport fishermen. And Pardee Reservoir, the picture in the upper right, is one of our foothill reservoirs, and it's actually known for its kokanee fishery. So we have landlocked kokanee in Pardee. They do reproduce upstream of Pardee Reservoir in the McCollum River upstream there. And it's a very attractive fishery. People love to fish it. And these kokanee, again, are zooplankton feeders. And so they're really at risk for the presence of this golden mussel competing with them for their food base. The other way that this can impact fish populations, this is a picture from South America, from Brazil, of a catfish that was feeding on golden mussels. Obviously highly available, the catfish very voracious. But the problem here is when they cut this catfish open and they put all of those mussels into a tank of water, they were all still alive. So this catfish isn't getting very much nutrients out of this supply, but he's also not eating anymore because he's full of golden mussels. And so even the non-zooplankton feeders, a catfish bottom feeder, could be impacted if they shift their diet to golden mussel, but aren't able to maintain enough nutrients from eating golden mussels to survive. Next slide. And so we've talked about, everyone's had some slides about like the parameters of where it lives and how it can survive. But we also need to be aware that that can be highly variable based on the conditions that the mussel is in. So it's obviously a good invader. It has really taken over in Brazil and Argentina. So some of the signs of a good invader are this adaptability to the environment. And so these are sort of the temperature ranges and the pH levels and the calcium levels that we have in the literature, but we don't know how they're going to adapt to our environment specifically. We know it looks like they could do really well, but we don't know what that invasion will look like over time. And the graph on the right is really showing the exponential level of the invasion in South America. And so that could be very well be what we're facing, which is another reason why we're being so conservative in our actions and starting very early with some very conservative actions to protect our waterways. Next slide. And then, obviously the first thing that we all think is, how are we going to control this? How can we manage this? There's a lot of different strategies, and we are looking at all of them. From biological, are there native predators? Are there fish that already exist here that will be efficient feeders? What I can say is that there's literature from both South America and Asia, and mainly South America, I will say, of predatory fish shifting their diets to golden mussel and really feeding primarily on them because they're such an available food source. But that's not really impacting the population. And so we want to steer clear of thinking about, I think maybe sometimes people think, hey, well, if we know there's a fish that likes to eat these mussels somewhere, let's introduce that fish to take care of the mussel problem. But then you're adding another layer onto this uncertainty about how this other invasive potentially is going to perform in the environment and how that's going to interact with the existing ecology. So we want to be very careful about how we bring in these strategies. The physical control methods like thermal, like heating, drying, UV radiation, all of these things are things we're going to investigate, but how hot do you have to get it? How long do they have to be exposed to UV lights? There's still many questions when we start looking at this, and the same for chemical treatment. If we could chlorinate, or if we could use a molluscicide, what is the dosage we need to provide? What is the contact time that they need to be exposed to it? And what is the efficiency? And so there's still lots of questions to be answered. And I think with that, I'm going to pass it off to Chuck Beckman.
All right. Thank you, Michelle, and good evening, everybody. We can go to the next slide from here. So as mentioned early on, I am the manager of Watershed and Recreation. I'm one of 2 watershed and recreation managers with the district, and my area of responsibility is around Pardee and Comanche reservoirs on our McCollum watershed. And I'm going to start by discussing what the potential impacts of introduction of the golden mussel could be to recreation, specifically to recreation in our reservoirs. As Michelle and Catherine both mentioned, when it comes to recreational fisheries or sport fisheries, the biggest impact from golden mussels is going to be the disturbance of the food web. At this point, right now, both Pardee and Comanche have what I think are pretty stellar, pretty phenomenal sport fisheries. We have a number of different types of sport fish in both reservoirs. As Michelle mentioned, we have the kokanee and Pardee reservoir, and those are all largely self-sustaining populations. Those are there because our reservoirs are so healthy and so conducive to natural reproduction of these fish. My fear as a recreation manager with the potential introduction of golden mussels is that over time we could see the natural reproduction and these sport fisheries collapse. As Catherine mentioned early on, it probably starts with seeing the smaller fish start to go away because they're the ones competing for resources that the golden mussels are consuming. And then over time, the larger fish are either going to die off or eventually be caught. And then we'll be left with no fishery or a much less viable fishery than what we have now. I've heard questions of, well, if the natural fishery dies off, we can make that up through fish stocking. Well, my response to that is initially, that's not a good management strategy. That's not where we want to start from. We want to try and prevent this and keep our natural fishery alive and healthy. But there is a very real possibility that if any of our recreational reservoirs see an infestation of golden mussels, it could very well impact fish stocking. And the fish stocking that we do now, we could expand that program, but it would in no way make up for the abundance of the fishery that we have now. We are concerned, East Bay Mud is concerned with the potential for fish stocking to transport golden mussels into our reservoirs from other water bodies. The way fish stocking works is fish are loaded into a truck with a tank full of water and transported from their place of origin, where they're hatched at a fish farm or a hatchery and brought to our reservoirs. So we've been in discussions with the fish farms and hatcheries that supply our reservoirs with fish to make sure that we can feel good about those fish that are coming in and that water that's coming into our reservoirs, and ensure that it's not bringing golden mussels into our lakes. But as we've had these conversations, we've learned that these fish farms and hatcheries are just as concerned with golden mussel infestation in their own facilities. So they are also concerned with where their trucks are going and what they could potentially be bringing back to their hatcheries. So we're working with hatcheries and fish farms on developing protocols to make sure that we can prevent the spread of golden mussels through fish stocking. But just emphasize again, really my priority is to protect our fisheries in the state they are now. Another potential impact is to boats on the reservoirs. Our reservoirs at San Pablo, Comanche, and Pardee all have marinas on the water that serve the public. Both Comanche and Pardee marinas also have private boats on the water that are moored there in mooring slips. Comanche has houseboats. Introducing golden mussel could lead to impacts to these boat owners. As we see infestations and some of the photos that you saw in Catherine's presentation, these mussels can build up pretty quickly and in large numbers on boats, and basically make them unusable. It'll The golden mussel will cover the whole of the boat. They can attach themselves to outdrives, props on prop-driven boats. They can certainly, and we've seen this happen with quagga and zebra mussels, attach themselves inside of jet-driven vessels, inside of the cooling systems on outboard and inboard motors, in the plumbing for live wells or ballast tanks on ski boats. So they can pose a real problem for boats as well. All of East Bay Mud's reservoirs are drinking water reservoirs, and as anyone who's visited them regularly knows, the reservoirs, the elevation changes over time, daily sometimes, depending on the time of year. In order to manage these marina facilities, we use an anchorage system that relies on pulleys and winches, so that we can move these marinas as the water level fluctuates. Infestations on marinas and on those pulleys and winches can really create problems for managing those marina facilities. So it's not a matter of these golden mussels just infesting and attaching to the marina structures. You know, if they're on the bottom of a float on a marina, it's not really bothering anything, but those mechanical components that we need to manage these structures are very vulnerable to infestation and can be impacted by the mussels pretty significantly. Probably a larger concern in terms of access to the water, and something that we've seen at other reservoirs in California related to quagga and zebra mussels is an infestation of golden mussels could potentially lead to a quarantine of the infested water, which would mean no boats coming or going to those waters. And that's, again, as a recreation manager, something that I would prefer not to see. And as Catherine mentioned at the beginning of the presentation today, just generally when we see infestations of invasive mussels come into recreational waters, it impacts the recreation experience overall. When we have those die-offs, as we would in East Bay Mud reservoirs, as those lake levels fluctuate, we're gonna have significant odor issues, and not pleasant odors, as these critters die off as they're come out of the water and desiccate. And what we've seen a lot of with quagga zebra mussels in the Great Lakes is they'll as these things die, they'll leave shell remnants behind on beaches, which essentially makes your beaches inaccessible. When you have sharp shell remnants on those beaches, they just become either uncomfortable or hazardous to walk on, and access to the water from the shoreline just becomes impossible or very difficult. We can go to the next slide, please. So while I'm concerned with impacts to recreation, I'm also, a big part of what I'm doing right now is working with Paul on how we develop our prevention programs, specifically tailored towards golden mussels. So as has already been mentioned, East Bay Mud's primary function is to provide water to our customers in the service area. And so at the end of the day, ultimately who I have to answer to is our board and our ratepayers in terms of what our prevention program looks like and what access to our reservoirs is going to look like. And as has been mentioned earlier, each reservoir, East Bay Mud reservoirs and reservoirs across the state, all have unique characteristics, whether it's the chemistry, the temperature, how the lake elevation is managed, throughout the year. And that's one of the reasons why you're seeing a number of different approaches and responses to the introduction of the golden mussel. Is each agency that manages a reservoir, or in some cases numerous agencies that are managing one reservoir, are all managing for different objectives and with different reservoir attributes in mind. So there are, you'll see different lakes handling this in different ways. I have been in discussion with other lake managers in the foothills. So Folsom Reservoir, Don Pedro, Woodward, New Maloney's, New Hogan, and we're in the very, very, very emphasize early stages of having discussions about a regional inspection and banding program. But the big challenge to that is the fact that there are so many different objectives with these different reservoirs, different managed objectives that we have to sort of find common ground with before we can really start to develop that program in earnest. So I am currently working on developing a plan to reopen access to our reservoirs. Right now, I don't have a timeline for when that will happen. As Michelle mentioned, while we have a good amount of information out there, we need a lot more information before we can make any firm decision on what reopening is going to look like. East Bay Mud has had an aquatic invasive prevention program in place for quagga zebra mussels for a number of years now, and it's been very successful. We developed that plan when quagga and zebra mussels were first started to move west towards California, and it's been a good plan. We weren't able to develop that plan overnight. It did take some time. It took studies, it took gathering information, and developing inspection protocols and procedures to come up with a good plan. So it's not something that we can just change the name of quagga and zebra mussel to golden mussel and call it good. Our reservoirs are really relatively low risk for quagga and zebra mussel. The calculus for the golden mussel is much different. It's a much higher risk. What we know about the golden mussel, as has already been mentioned, is rather alarming from the perspective of a water company, a drinking water company. So we really, frankly, have a lot of work to do and more information to gather before we can really be certain that we have a good plan in place to reopen our reservoirs. As the recreation manager, I'd like nothing more to see boats back on the water and see folks out catching fish. We're just unfortunately not there yet, but we are working on it a lot. And that I think that sums it up for me. So I think we're probably ready to move on to questions.
Yes, thank you, Chuck. So thank you all for all of our speakers. It's been great to hear from all of you. With that, I'm going to ask Catherine to help me with some of the questions we've been compiling from the chat function. So please note, we'll be answering questions that are broad and applicable to many customers. So if you have questions or concerns that are more specific, please email waterwednesday@ebmud.com and we can get answers to those for you. And then if your questions don't get answered tonight, because we are running short on time, or if you think of something later, please also email waterwednesday@ebmud.com. And don't forget to check back in for a week, and we'll have that virtual recording of this event and up on our website. So Catherine, if you have some of those questions.
Yeah, so I've been trying to answer some of them as we go, but I flagged a couple for response now. So one of the questions was, does the fish eating these golden mussel larvae become toxic for us to eat? The fish supply like freshwater fish, i.e. trout. So maybe that's a Michelle question.
Yeah, I haven't heard of anything about any toxicity levels in ingested fish. But I just haven't read anything. So again, there's a lot of unknowns. I think that's a great question. I don't think that there's a lot of reason to think that they would create a toxicity in the fish. But something worth looking into. We can try to follow up on that.
There was a question about them being flow feeders and would nutrients and would eat nutrients in the water. So would they multiply faster near a wastewater discharge facility?
So I would say to that, they are very prolific reproducers. As long as conditions are good, they're going to take nutrients in and they're going to reproduce. And they actually reproduce continuously. They don't it doesn't take them long to create more eggs and put more eggs in the environment. And so I think that they're not gonna multiply any faster in a wastewater environment because they're already in just their normal range of activity. They're so prolific and so they reproduce so quickly in a normal situation. I don't see that there's not any capacity for change.
Okay, thank you. This one is for Chuck. So is there any use of the lake allowed at this time? And can you get a little bit more into detail about what is available for users of the lake?
Yeah, so the recreation areas are all open. Party normally closes for the winter season, but just opened last weekend. So the recreation areas are open. Both Party and Comanche are offering rental boats available through the concessionaire. And all the other recreation amenities at those parks are fully functional and available. So our trails, campgrounds, rec halls, and everything else. The San Pablo Reservoir boat ramp is currently closed and will remain closed. So there's no boat launching at San Pablo, but shoreline fishing at all of our reservoirs is still available. And the San Pablo boat launch area will be open to shore fishing, I believe, at some point next month. I don't know the exact date on that, but you can find that out.
Thank you. This one's probably one for Catherine. So how are the golden mussels kept in control in their original environment? So where, in South America, in Asia, what is being done?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to add to what Chuck was saying too, is I believe San Pablo also has rentals available too. I just thought I'd throw that out there. But in terms of how they're controlled in their native environment, like any situation, there's disease, there's organisms larger, whether they're fish or birds, that have evolved with them, so they're able to eat them and get the nutrients from them. What we need to be aware of too, I mean, are things eating like quag and zebra mussel here, and will they be eating golden mussel? I'm sure our fish and sturgeon bottom feeders are already doing that. But the problem with that is that it's very layered. For example, one, because they didn't evolve together, these like, for example, there's been studies with sturgeon who in the Delta whose primary diet now is Asian clam. And the amino acids in their tissues should reflect 80% of the amino acids coming from Asian clam. However, they're only finding like 20%. So, fish aren't able to absorb the nutrients from them. So there's nothing, like, they won't eat them as often. So yes, fish will eat them, birds will eat them. They're seeing that there's bird die-offs because of the toxicity levels in the mussels in the Great Lakes with quag and zebra mussel, that the birds are dying of botulism. So these are things that you don't see as much in their native habitats. So there just aren't there aren't all the competing organisms that are more harmonious with them to keep it, in their native population, their populations are being kept in check. Whereas here, the local organisms aren't either used to them, knowing that they're food, or finding out that they're not a good food and they'll go somewhere else. So that's some of the problem. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, great, thank you. So I think we have time for about one more. So again, if we didn't get to your question tonight, please feel free to email us at waterwednesday@ebmud.com. So I'll ask the last one. So is there a risk that birds will simply bring them? And I think Michelle is prepared to answer that question.
Yeah, so unfortunately, yes, birds could be a vector. If we look at this from a risk analysis, though, it's a slight chance, but these can be carried, just like they can be carried by your boats, they can be carried by birds, and they can, you know, make it into the water supply there. We don't anticipate that as being a really significant risk factor, and clearly there's nothing we can do about that. But one thing, you know, as we do these risk assessments and we think about all of the best management strategies that we can apply to our system, that if we end up with golden mussels in the system, it would be very hard to track back the single vector of responsibility, just because there are a number of ways that these can get into the system.
Awesome, thank you. Mary, I think we're at time.
All right. Well, thank you all again. We appreciate all of your time, and thank you for everybody who attended tonight. Next month's Water Wednesday will be a presentation on fire preparedness. As climate change continues to increase the frequency of and severity of wildfires, water utilities face unique challenges in ensuring service continuity and protecting critical infrastructure. So join us on March 19th at 6 p.m. for an in-depth discussion on how the East Bay MUD is preparing for fire-related risks. And so you'll be able to sign up for that webinar and find the recording of this webinar at ebmud.com/Water Wednesday. So hope to see you all there. Thanks again.